Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our preview of the Sedgwick Brand Protection Recall Index for the first quarter of 2024. I'm Chris Harvey, and presenting with me today are my colleagues Matt Walker and Amanda Combs. Matt, doesn't it seem like just yesterday we were talking about 2023 trends?
Yeah, it really does, Chris. There is a saying, though, that goes, time flies when you're having fun. So, Amanda, on your side, can you think of anything more fun than reviewing the latest recall index?
Definitely not. And I'm excited to jump into today's session, and hopefully so is everyone who is joining us today. Now we have about 1,400 people registered for this webinar today, covering 84 different countries. So very exciting. We'd like to thank all of our partners who will share their insights about regulatory trends across the industries we cover in the Recall Index. They will discuss steps companies can take to reduce their risk amidst all the changes.
Yeah, so Q1 2024 U.S. Sedgwick Brand Protection Recall Index will be released tomorrow. The full report offers more details about product recalls from the first quarter of the year and a peek at the 2024 April numbers. It also offers some unique perspectives around regulatory changes that will impact businesses in the coming months. Amanda, do you want to talk about the industries that we cover?
Sure thing. Thank you, Matt. I'd be glad to. The index looks at 5 industries from a U.S. angle: automotive, consumer product, food and drink, pharmaceutical, and medical devices. We review data collected from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, or CPSC, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or USDA, and the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA. And just as a reminder, Sedgwick also publishes a European edition of our Recall Index. Our EU and UK colleagues are hosting a webinar tomorrow to preview that data. The European Index will be released the following day. We encourage you to attend tomorrow's webinar to see what companies operating in the UK and EU should know. We know that changes in the UK and EU will impact US business operations. So for registration information, send us an email or drop us a note in the chat and we'll get you the details. Now I'll turn things over to Chris.
All right, thanks, Amanda. So some landscape. So there were 909 recalls in Q1 of 2024, and that's across all 5 sectors that we follow. This is an 8% increase compared to Q4 of last year. It is also the highest total in a single quarter since Q4 of 2018. The medical device, automotive, FDA food and drink, and consumer goods sectors all saw an increase in recalls. The 92 consumer product recalls this quarter mark only the 3rd time in 12 years that there have been more than 90 recalls in a single quarter for this sector. In contrast, though, the total number of units recalled across all 5 of the industries dropped by nearly half, so about 44%. There were 230.6 million units recalled in Q4 of last year compared to 129.6 million units in Q1 of this year. Only the food and drink industry saw higher numbers of units affected for both the FDA and USDA recalls. The number of units impacted in the med device sector fell by more than half, so about 51% quarter over quarter. The volume of units recalled in the consumer product industry dropped nearly 72%, so pretty large. All right, Matt, what else is going on across the market sectors?
Yeah, Chris, so one trend that we're seeing is more challenges to propose legislation. So in the automotive sector, 2 industry trade groups petitioned to overturn the Federal Trade Commission's Combating Auto Retail Scams rule. In addition, the Federal Highway Administration's rule on measuring greenhouse gas emissions was the subject of 2 lawsuits. Both suits claim that the agency doesn't have the authority to impose the regulations that are mandated in the rule. In the pharmaceutical industry, an independent laboratory filed a citizen petition with the FDA calling for an investigation into benzene in certain acne products and requested a market withdrawal of those products. Amanda, what have you observed?
Well, determining the best way to regulate the growing use of artificial intelligence, or AI, technology continues to be on the agenda for government agencies. Now, in addition, keeping consumers protected while shopping online is a top priority as digital marketplaces expand. Now, Chris, should we take a look at each industry?
Sure thing, Amanda. So as far as the agenda, we are going to begin with the automotive industry. That'll be followed by consumer products, After that, we're going to highlight data and trends in the food and drink industry. Then we'll go to medical device. And finally, we will round out with the pharmaceutical industry. We will take a break at the end of each industry section to take your questions, and then we'll share some insights from some of our partners as well. If there is time, we'll also try to take some questions at the end of the webinar. I do want to mention, though, the audience's mics are muted, so you will have to enter your questions in the chat or Q&A module. And then at the start of each industry section, we will ask a question to test your knowledge. You'll see a pop-up on the right-hand side of your screen where you can record your answer. Just don't forget to hit submit. All right, Matt, what is our first question in the auto industry?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So anyone who's joined our recent webinar knows that the questions here, they're going to be multiple choice. Everyone's answers are also anonymous. So the first question, recent studies have shown that one of the biggest factors preventing consumers from buying electric vehicles or EVs is a concern about the lack of charging stations if they are away from home. A recent study by the Alliance for Automotive Innovation warns that the growth of public charging station availability in the U.S. lags far behind EV adoption rates. According to the report, how many chargers would the U.S. need to install every day for the next 7.2 years to keep up with current and predicted rates of EV sales? Is the number A, 414 chargers per day, B, 1,023 chargers per day, or C, 128 chargers per day? We'll give you the answer here in a little bit. You know, while the audience here is selecting their choice, I did some traveling over the weekend and noticed the price of gas. I don't often pay a lot of attention to it, don't drive as much as I used to. But, you know, question for you, Chris and Amanda, is do you by any chance remember what the cost of gas was when you first started driving?
Oh, I think it was slightly under $1. I don't know if that tells my age or not, but I think it was about under $1. Of course, back then when I started driving, I'd only put like $4 or $5 in just to get to me exactly where I needed to go that day. I don't know about you, Amanda.
Same here, Chris. I think, you know, that's been a while ago, but I think it was over $1, definitely, you know, under $1.50. And same here, wasn't always filling my tank up, but putting in just money here and there. Definitely an increase to today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you were putting in your tank back then is what you get for a gallon now. So, Chris, I'll turn it over to you to dive into NHTSA.
Thanks. We did get a comment in the chat, 99 cents. So that's about right when I remember as well. So, all right. So in January 2024, the Federal Trade Commission, or FTC, postponed the effective date of its new Combating Auto Retail Scams rule. 2 automotive industry trade groups had petitioned to overturn the regulation. The rule, which was finalized in December of last year, is being challenged over claims that it will increase compliance costs for car dealers. The FTC has asserted dealers who currently follow the law will not see higher fees. The FTC is not the only agency involved in legal battles over new regulations as well. More than 20 state departments of transportation have filed suit against the Federal Highway Administration's rule on measuring greenhouse gas emissions that went into effect in January. The plaintiffs claim that the agency doesn't have the authority to impose these regulations. And then KPMG released a new report based on information from more than 1,000 automotive industry executives. It showed general pessimism across the sector for operations around the world, except for China. Most automakers expressed concern about the economy, rising costs, and supply chain disruptions. So now let's get into some of the details on the data, but first the answer to the poll question, Amanda.
Thanks, Chris. So again, the question was, according to a recent report by Alliance for Automotive Innovation, how many chargers would the U.S. need to install every day for the next 7.2 years to keep up with current and predicted rates of EV sales? It looked like the majority chose option A, 414 per day, and that is correct. This equates to nearly 3 chargers every 10 minutes through the end of 2030. Now let's look at the Q1 data. So in Q1 of 2024, NHTSA issued 262 automotive recalls. This is a 9.2% increase compared to Q4 of 2023. Only 2 quarters in the last 5 years have experienced a greater number of events. The number of impacted units fell by 15.2%. It went from 14.69 million in Q4 of 2023 to 12.45 million in Q1 of 2024. The average recall size was lower also. It fell from a little over 61,000 units in Q4 to about 47,500 this quarter. Electrical Systems was the leading cause of recalls for the 5th consecutive quarter. It was linked to 66 events compared to 53 last quarter. Equipment was second, the most common concern, cited for 36 recalls. Steering was third with 25 events. Airbags was the most common reason for automotive recalls by volume in Q1 of 2024. There were 2.96 million units impacted. Electrical Systems was second with 2.81 million units affected, and Structure was third with 1.99 million units involved in recalls this quarter. Automobiles were the largest product category of recalls with 232 events in Q1 of 2024. Now this is up from 212 last quarter. The equipment category had 29 recalls that impacted 1.98 million units. There was 1 recall for tires, and there were no recalls for child seats in Q1 of 2024.
Yeah, so before we take questions, we do want to share insights from our partner. So we have Christopher Spencer, who's with the Product Liability Consultancy. He said, companies once enjoyed a presumption of reasonableness if they complied with regulations, but many automotive systems are unregulated and are covered by neither industry standards or recommended practices. Technology is moving too quickly. Regulators are struggling to keep up. The Society of Automotive Engineers, or SAE, is trying to keep pace too. The more features a vehicle has, especially new features, the more that can go wrong. As technology marches on, so do new theories of liability. U.S. regulators and courts may take action modeled on EU directives pertaining to vehicles and components at the end of life. All this will impose pressure. Pressure can produce error. So great insights there from Christopher Spencer.
Yep, definitely. And you can read more from Christopher in the published article that we will send out. So now we're going to take some questions from the automotive industry. So again, please enter those into the chat module or the QA module, and then we will quickly bring them up. I do see a comment here about in the 70s, 25 cents for a gallon. Can you imagine that? Would be great to see that now. All right, here's a question. In its report about automotive executives, pessimistic view of industry, did KPMG offer any advice? Matt or Amanda, when do you want to take that?
Yeah, Chris, I can take that. So fortunately, they did offer some suggestions. I know that one of those was to build an AI strategy. I think that was comprehensive, forward-looking, and that it also considered all the ways that AI tools can impact how a vehicle is designed, built, sold, and as well as driven. Another piece of advice that came from that, though, was to form a collaborative relationship to keep new ideas kind of flowing when it comes to research and the development piece.
All right. Thank you, Matt. I don't see any additional questions for the auto industry, so now we'll move on to the next industry. Matt, do you want to dive into consumer products?
Thanks, Chris. But first, let's start with a question. So in January, the Federal Trade Commission announced its biggest fine to date for companies accused of violating the Made in the USA labeling rule. The question is, how much was the fine? Was it A, 15 million, B, 875,000, or C, 2 million? We'll give you a few minutes here to make your selection. And speaking of consumer products, Chris, I think you have ICPHSO coming up.
Yeah, the North American Workshop is coming up in June 26th in Bentonville, Arkansas, hosted at Walmart. So if you're in the consumer product industry, definitely check it out. Some really good sessions on chemicals, recalls, lithium batteries, compliance plans, amongst other things as well. So definitely a good event to check out upcoming here. All right, with that, let me turn things over to Matt.
Thanks, Chris. So in March, the U.S. Senate unanimously voted to confirm 2 Republicans to serve as commissioners on the Federal Trade Commission. Melissa Holyoke and Andrew Ferguson were nominated in July of 2023. Their addition marks the first time since October of 2022 that the agency has had a full complement of 5 commissioners. They also bring additional perspectives to a commission that had been operating with only 3 Democratic commissioners since March of 2023. The new commissioners will have to hit the ground running, though. The agency has been active with plans for regulating AI, especially around issues of market competitiveness and fair labor practices. This aligns with the Biden-Harris administration's efforts to implement the priorities listed in the October 2023 executive order on the development and deployment of AI in government agencies. CPSC also now has all 5 of its seats filled. CPSC's second Republican, Douglas Ziak, began his term on March 25th, 2024. Even with Ziak's appointment, Democrats continue to hold a majority with 3 commissioners, including Chair Alexander Hoehn-Saric. That means the agency's priorities are not likely to change. Those priorities were previewed by Chair Hoehn-Saric in February at the International Consumer Product Health and Safety Organization, or ICPSO, annual symposium. He also stressed that the agency would continue to use the tools available, including fines and unilateral press releases. In addition, Chair Hoehn-Saric said that regulating online marketplaces will be an important focus for the year ahead and beyond. He emphasized the need for e-commerce sites to do more to keep hazardous products off their sites and to better police bad actors.
All right, thank you, Matt. So before we get to the data, let's see the answer to our question here. In January, the FTC announced its biggest fine to date for companies accused of violating the Made in the USA labeling rule. How much was the fine? Looks like the majority of the audience did pick the right answer. The answer is C, $2 million against an agricultural machine manufacturer. That company allegedly labeled thousands of replacement parts for its tractors and other agricultural equipment as made in the USA when they were actually imported from overseas. All right, so now for the consumer product recall data. So in Q1, there were 92 CPSC recalls. This is up about 6% from Q4 of last year. The number of units impacted dropped by nearly 72%, as I mentioned earlier. And then there were 23.3 million units this quarter compared to 82.7 million in Q4 of last year. It is worth noting that the last quarter marked a 6-year high for units recalled. There were 2 recalls in Q1 that involved more than 2 million units. This is compared to 4 that we saw in Q4 of last year. A recall of furniture tip kits reported that it involved millions of units, but did not provide a specific count. So data for that recall was not included in the total for this quarter. The CPSC issued 16 million in fines in Q1. The agency did not issue any fines in Q4 of last year. The entire amount was for a single civil penalty against a retailer who knowingly failed to immediately report a defective steamer to the agency. And then fire was the top consumer product hazard by event in Q1. It was tied to 19 recalls. Burns was the second leading concern with 15 recall events. It was followed by injury with 13 recalls. And then burns was the top risk by unit with 19.4 million units impacted. And that was followed by fire with 1.34 million units affected. Sports and recreation accounted for the most recalls by product category. It was linked to 24 recalls in Q1. Children's products was second with 16, and electronics was third with 13 events. In terms of units impacted, electronics was the top product category. There were 19.1 million electronic units recalled in Q1. Most of these were from a single burn hazard recall of 16.8 million laptop AC adapters. Home appliances had 942,000 units recalled, and this category was the second highest by volume. Home furnishings and decor had the third highest number of units impacted with 639,000.
Now, before we take questions, we want to share insights from our partners, Eric Swanholt, Kristen McGaver-Sequoia, and Megan Chester with Foley and Lardner. We're approaching the mid-year mark for the U.S. federal government's fiscal year 2024. It is clear that the CPSC shows no signs of slowing its significant enforcement activities from fiscal year 2023. The CPSC continues to emphasize civil penalties as a meaningful enforcement tool. Manufacturers, importers, distributors, and retailers must take proactive steps to foster a culture of compliance. They should also establish or reinforce their policies and procedures to assess and act on any information received that reasonably could be reportable under the CPSIA. Action now will help potential targets avoid the need for a reactive response to CPSC enforcement activity in the future.
All right, thanks, Amanda. Again, you can read more from Kristen and Eric within our published articles. So now we're going to take questions from the consumer product industry. So please go ahead and enter any questions you may have into the chat or Q&A module. Let's see, here's one. Do you expect the CPSC to continue its scrutiny of online marketplaces in 2024? I can take this one. I think Matt alluded a little bit to it, but yeah, definitely the CPSC chair, again, Hohen Sark, at the ICVSO event back in February at the annual symposium, he had some clear marks on it and called on online marketplaces to be responsible gatekeepers and to do their part to keep these hazardous products off of the market. He also said that online marketplaces do have tools and resources to help keep these sellers off of the market if they don't meet the certain safety standards as well. So I definitely think the scrutiny will continue. All right, I'll just give a second to see. Okay, I don't see any additional questions. So now on to the next industry, Amanda.
So now we'll look at the food and drink sector, but first our question. So in March, the Federal Trade Commission released an analysis of features in the infant formula market that contributed to the supply disruptions that followed the 2022 product recalls. The agency identified 3 key factors. The question is, what is not one of those factors? A, the rebate structure under the USDA's Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for women, infant, and children. B, the FDA's delay in acting when early safety issues were detected at some formula facilities. Or C, the FDA's extensive regulation of infant formula. We'll give you a few seconds here to make your selections.
While everyone's making their selection, I did get pinged about the EU version of this, the European version of the index, which occurs tomorrow. So we can try to put another link into the chat or Q&A module for anyone's interested in participating in that one tomorrow. All right, with that, I think we're now on to the more details related to the food and drink sector. So after being finalized last year, the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Strengthening Organic Enforcement Final Rule is now being enforced by the agency. The goal of the law is to improve organic control systems and farm-to-market traceability to address organic fraud. The regulations center on the production, handling, and sale of agricultural products labeled as organic under the National Organic Program. Companies will be closely following how strictly the USDA will monitor producers and suppliers and when the first enforcement actions will be. Another area that is definitely a focus of enforcement is lead contamination, especially in food products aimed at children. In response to an ongoing recall of applesauce found to contain extremely high levels of lead, the FDA has increased testing and issued more voluntary recalls for cinnamon and products containing cinnamon. The theory is that criminal actors are intentionally adding lead to ground cinnamon to increase the weight and thus the price, which is scary stuff. Also, the FDA is tackling health risks believed to be linked to PFAS chemicals. In February, the agency announced that manufacturers voluntarily phase out of certain types of PFAS used to grease-proof food packaging materials was complete. The FDA said that these substances were no longer being sold in the U.S. for food packaging. Regulators are also looking at consumer education. In January, a bipartisan group of 25 House members and senators introduced the Fair and Accurate Ingredient Representation on Labels Act. The goal is to ensure that consumers can make informed purchasing decisions when buying meat, poultry, cell-cultured meat, and plant-based meat alternative products. Amanda?
Now to the answer to our question in the latest food industry data. So again, the question was, In March, the Federal Trade Commission released an analysis of features in the infant formula market that contributed to the supply disruptions following the 2022 product recalls. The agency identified 3 key factors. What is not one of those factors? Looks like this one, we were a little tricky on this one. Most answered A, and the answer is B. The FDA's delay in acting when early safety issues were detected at some formula facilities. The third factor the Federal Trade Commission noted was that the U.S. infant formula market has been controlled by only a few manufacturers for decades. Matt, would you like to talk about FDA data?
Thanks, Amanda. So the number of FDA food recalls rose by almost 28% in Q1 of 2024 compared to Q4 of 23. There were 134 events. Only 3 quarters have recorded more events in the past 5 years. The number of units impacted increased by 395%. It grew from 6.2 million units last quarter to 30.7 million in Q1. The average recall size grew from about 59,000 units in Q4 to almost 300,000 units this quarter. There were 51 recalls for undeclared allergens, with the exception of 1 quarter, which was Q4 of 2020. Undeclared allergens has been the leading cause for 7 straight years. Milk and wheat were the 2 leading allergens, tied to 8 recalls each, followed by sulfites and nuts with 6 recalls apiece. Bacterial contamination was second in terms of events. It saw 34 recalls in Q1, and it also had the highest number of units recalled with about 25 million. Foreign materials was third in terms of events with 13 recalls, and it was second in terms of volume with its recalls impacting about 4 million units. Prepared foods had the most recalls of any product category in Q1. There were 43 events linked to prepared foods. Baked goods was the second highest category with 24 recalls, and that was followed by produce with 15. In terms of units impacted, baked goods had the most with about 25.5 million units. This was largely fueled by a single granola bar recall that had a risk of salmonella. Prepared foods was second with about 1.6, almost 1.7 million units affected. Supplements was third with almost 1.6, and it was followed closely by seafood, which had about 1.52. The number of Class 1 recalls in Q1 of 2024 rose to 59 compared to 47 in Q4. The number of units impacted fell from 4.5 million to 3.1 million quarter over quarter. The number and volume of Class 2 recalls both increased. It rose from 49 events and 1.6 million units in Q4 to 63 events and almost 27.7 million units in Q1. Q1 also saw an increase in the number of Class 3 recalls to 12 events. In contrast, there was a decrease in the number of Class 3 units impacted to almost 64,000. There were 121 unique companies involved in FDA food recalls in Q1. Most only had 1 event in the quarter, but 11 companies had 2 recalls and 1 company had 3. Amanda, do you want to share the USDA data?
Looking at the USDA data, in Q1 of 2024, the number of USDA food recalls decreased by 31.6% compared to Q4 of 2023. The totals went from 19 events last quarter to 13 recalls this quarter. The number of units affected increased by 22.1%. It grew from 309,722 pounds last quarter to 378,055 pounds this quarter. The top reason for USDA recalls by event was a combination of misbranding and undeclared allergens. There were 4 events. Foreign materials and bacterial contamination were tied for second. They each had 3 events. No import reinspection, contamination, and underprocessing were linked to 1 recall apiece. By unit count, foreign materials was the leading cause of USDA recalls. It impacted 230,308 pounds. Contamination was second, linked to a little over 93,000 pounds of recalled product. Poultry was responsible for the most units recalled by product category in Q1 of 2024. There were nearly 260,000 pounds affected. Beef was second with 93,277 pounds recalled, and pork was third with 24,261 pounds impacted. Pork had 6 recalls. This was the most of any product category. Poultry was second with 5 events, and multiple meats and beef were each involved in one USDA recall in Q1 of 2024.
All right, thanks, Amanda. So before we take questions, we do want to share insights from another one of our partners. This is Dr. David Acheson, President and CEO of the Acheson Group. So just a quote from his article, we expect strong FDA enforcement of all requirements throughout 2024. The new leadership certainly does not want the occurrence of another food safety issue like that of infant formula. The agency will keep a strong focus on chemicals, heavy metals, and food additives. We also expect to see continued pressure from states and consumers in these areas. On the USDA side, we expect an ongoing focus by the FSIS regarding salmonella. This attention will evolve as the pilot programs are wrapped up and the agency completes its review of industry input and comments in order to finalize a new rule. So good insight from David. Again, you can read more within our published index as well. So with that, we will take some questions from the food and drink industry. I did see a couple consumer product questions come in, so we'll save those to the end and circle back on those. Let's see, we are seeing a few questions here. I'll try to hit some of these. When will the U.S. Recall Index report for 2023 be available? So we do have a report that's out there that we did a webinar on. I think it was in February. So that is available. We can try to put a link in. The team's on it already. So now there's a link there where you can access the full 23 State of the Nation report. Was there a correlation between these recall increases and supply chain crunch? Indirectly, I think we do see issues with supply chain availability and just in general, labor shortages, other factors that may have contributed to these recalls. That's where I think we have seen shortcuts by suppliers, and this is why supplier verification is really critical as well. Are supplements regulated now? FDA does regulate supplements. It's more so after they hit the market, and less than obviously pharmaceutical or medical devices. Do you think the increase is due to companies taking shortcuts? I touched on that a little bit before, but I do think in some cases there is that. Maybe less on the brand, but more on suppliers. We do see recalls from violations that in my mind can be prevented, whether it's GMP type issues, whether it's labeling issues. So making sure companies have robust quality procedures and checks and balances, I think is going to be very important as well. Let's see. With the recent recalls of cinnamon and applesauce products containing cinnamon, do you anticipate increased regulation? Amanda or Matt?
Take that one, Chris.
Okay.
Yep, I can take that one. So I think we talked about that a little earlier, but it is important to note that the lead contamination in the cinnamon was likely due to criminal acts, where those were added on purpose and not accidental contamination as we see with other food products. Now, with that said, state attorney generals, I think, are calling for FDA to issue guidance to baby food industries on finished product testing for lead and other toxic elements. Now, this idea is already part of the agency's Closer to Zero action plan, but we see that the AGs have claimed that there have been infinite delays in finalizing that guidance. So I think this will likely be the first step that FDA would take towards regulation.
Thanks, Amanda. Let's see, there's a question here on trending data, U.S. manufacturing versus foreign facilities. I will say we have seen, and I'll see what kind of data we might be able to separate out, but we're definitely seeing recalls due to foreign suppliers and some of the investigations, inspections that the agency is doing. And that's not only just food, it's also on the pharmaceutical side. We've seen an increase with that as well. So I think there is a spotlight on foreign suppliers, which again, for U.S. manufacturing makes it critical to have good verifications and checks and balances in place. You obviously can't prevent everything, but there may be some things that can be mitigated. So there's a few more questions. We'll try to circle back on that, but in the interest of time, we'll now move on to the medical device industry. We're going to test your knowledge here. You guys done very well so far. So the question, In January, the FDA issued its final rule on quality management system regulation for medical devices. The new regulation will bring U.S. medical device standards in line with those in other countries. The agency acknowledged that there will be costs associated with retraining staff and modifying existing internal processes. However, the FDA estimates that the harmonization with the international standard will result in an annualized net cost savings across the medical device industry. So here's your question. How much has the agency estimated the industry will save annually? Is it A, 1 billion, B, 275 million, or C, 554 million? So go ahead and make your selection.
And Chris, while they're making their selection, and at the last recall index, we mentioned our recall roundtable that we were hosting in New Jersey. So we completed that late February, had really great conversations with manufacturers and industry leaders within product recall, specifically pharmaceutical and medical device. So just wanted to call out here that, we will be hosting another one of those in Las Vegas in August. So if any of our listeners are interested, please feel free to reach out to get more details on what the recall roundtable encompasses there.
Yep, definitely a good event. Thanks for mentioning, Matt. All right, Matt, we'll stay with you. Can you give us some insights that we're seeing in the medical device industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So medical device companies are facing a number of potentially onerous new regulations. As we mentioned in the question for the sector, FDA issued its final rule on quality management system regulation. The new rule will help advance and improve medical device quality, safety, and effectiveness, and more closely align U.S. processes with the ISO standard used in many other countries. The FDA is also pushing for oversight of laboratory-developed tests. Most of these tests do not currently require FDA approval. To help make the process easier, the agency has also proposed reclassifying most current Class 3s in vitro diagnostics, or IVDs, into the lower risk category of Class 2. It's unclear how the agency is determining which IVDs to reclassify, but it would ease the regulatory burden for manufacturers. Many laboratory-developed tests and other medical device companies provide data in their FDA marketing authorization submissions. The agency has recently warned about fraudulent data from third-party partners in a letter to the industry. The FDA has also reminded sponsors and manufacturers that ultimately they are responsible for the accuracy of the data included in their applications. Amanda, do you want to give the answer to the question?
Sure thing. So again, the question was, how much has the FDA estimated the industry will save annually with the new quality management system regulation for medical devices? It looks like, again, great job. Majority chose the answer C, 554 million, which is correct. That's partially due to more efficiency with having US and international standards more closely aligned. So now we'll look at some of the data. In Q1 of 2024, the number of medical device recalls rose by 13.8% compared to Q4 of 2023. The 296 recalls this quarter represent the second highest total since Q3 of 2018. The number of units impacted fell by 51.2%. The total went from 109.35 million in Q4 to 53.4 million this quarter. There was also a field safety notice issued with additional safety instructions for surgical clippers. That notice impacted approximately 53.6 million units, but did not result in a product recall. Quality issues were the leading reason for medical device recalls. It accounted for 51 events in Q1 of 2024. Sterility concerns were second most common cause, and those were linked to 35 events this quarter. Mislabeling was third with 31 recalls. Now, in terms of volume, sterility was the top reason for recalls in Q1 of 2024. It affected 12.49 million units. Quality issues affected the second highest number of medical device units. There were more than 10.66 million units recalled in Q1. Parts issues affected 9 million units, making it the third most common reason for recalls in the industry. The number of Class 1 recalls in Q1 of 2024 rose 17.9% to 33, compared to 28 in Q4. Now, the number of units impacted fell from 81.3 million to 19.1 million quarter over quarter.
Before we take questions, we do want to share insights on the medical device sector from our partners, A&C Johnson and Pat Schaefer with FTI Consulting. So they said, the practice of conducting mock recalls in the medical device industry is not just a practice recommended by regulators, it's a vital component of risk management and patient safety. By preparing for the worst case scenario, manufacturers can minimize the impact of recalls, protect patients, and preserve their reputation. As the industry continues to evolve with technological advancements, the complexity of medical devices and their recalls will increase. This underscores the importance of robust, tested recall strategies. Ultimately, mock recalls do more than test compliance procedures. They demonstrate a commitment to the highest standards of quality and safety. So great insight from A&C and Pat. You can read more when the index is released.
All right, thank you, Matt. So now we'll move on to any questions from anyone that has specific to the medical device industry. So we'll give it a minute there. I did see a question come in potentially during our last industry. Where can we obtain the most current recall notifications and status of resolution? So unfortunately, based on my experience, there's not one sole place where you can get all recall notices that are issued out. Most of them are managed by the recalling firm, the manufacturer in it itself. Some recalls, like in the med device industry, aren't even necessarily reported to the agency if they're like a class 3. So unfortunately, there's not a one sole place where you can go and get notifications. We are able to pull the data from the enforcement reports and the CPSC and NHTSA, but the actual letters, unfortunately, there's not a place. And then, unfortunately, too, the status of resolution. So what was the response rate? Not a lot of great places to be able to get the response rates. Sometimes the agency will publish overall response rates. I know the CPSC years back did some response rates based on if there was direct notification versus none, something more widespread like a press release, but there's not a lot of data, unfortunately, available there. Let's see. With the recent FDA warning about third-party test data, what should companies be doing to ensure they are getting accurate information?
Chris, I can take that one. So the FDA, I know, recommends that companies work with labs that have been voluntarily accredited. I think it's called Accreditation Scheme for Conformity Assessment Program, I believe. And then with that, I know law firm Hogan Lovells offered some red flags to watch out for with outsourced data. I believe those included identical results from multiple test subjects, different labs using similar or identical language, or reaching identical conclusions, as well as data that seem to be just too perfect.
Okay. Thank you, Matt. I don't see any other questions specific to med device. So now we will move on to our next area. Amanda.
Now we've reached the last industry, pharmaceuticals. So here is your question. In February, a chain of discount stores pled guilty to storing food, drugs, medical devices, and cosmetics in unsanitary conditions. The company was charged with one misdemeanor count of causing FDA-regulated products to become adulterated. The question is, as part of its plea agreement, how big was the fine the company committed to pay? Was it A, $41.67 million, B, $112.58 million, or C, $895,000? I'll give you a few seconds here to make your selections. I think Matt and Chris, the audience, has been doing pretty well with the questions so far. We're gonna have to make them a little trickier for next time. But what are your guesses for the answer to the question?
I'm gonna split the difference and go B. Actually, no, that's not.
Yeah, I think that's
A. I'll go A.
I was going to say, I think it's always safe to go right in the middle. So A would be my choice also.
All right.
In a few minutes, what everyone chose. But Chris will turn it over to you to give us some updates for pharmaceutical.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. All right, benzene has garnered increased government attention lately. The FDA issued guidance reminding drug makers of their duty to ensure accurate testing for benzene, a known carcinogen. The agency also urged companies to reformulate products if they use ingredients that may contain it. In addition, benzene was the subject of a citizen petition by an independent laboratory that called on the FDA to investigate the drug in common acne products and to pull these products from the market. While the FDA could tighten restrictions on benzene, it may be loosening them on marijuana. In January, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services shared the FDA's research that supports rescheduling marijuana from a highly controlled Schedule I drug to a Schedule III drug. This would put marijuana in the same category as some forms of codeine, anabolic steroids, and testosterone. The agency is also working to reduce drug shortages by requiring that drug makers supply the FDA with timely notifications of any significant production disruption or supply shortages. This aligns with programs being put in place in the EU as well. Matt?
Yeah, so let's see how everyone did on our pharmaceutical question, and then we'll look at the data. So again, the question was, how big was the fine that a chain of discount stores agreed to pay for storing food, drugs, medical devices, and cosmetics in unsanitary conditions? We here chose A. Looks like the audience also followed suit, which was the correct answer. So the correct answer was A, $41.67 million. As part of its plea agreement, the company also committed to meeting robust corporate compliance and reporting requirements for the next 3 years. This case shows the regulators are looking at the entire supply chain when it comes to consumer safety. So now on to the numbers. Amanda, do you want to take it from here?
I'd be happy to. There was a 14.5% decrease in pharmaceutical recalls in Q1 of 2024 compared to Q4 of 2023. There were 112 events this quarter compared to 131 last quarter. The number of units fell by 46.3%. Those went from 17.31 million in Q4 to 9.28 million in Q1. There were 2 recalls this quarter that impacted more than 1 million units. This compared to 4 recalls in Q4. Failed specifications was the leading cause of pharmaceutical recalls with 26 events. Contamination was second, the most common concern in Q1 of 2024. It was linked to 21 recalls. Sterility was third, and it was tied to 18 events this quarter. In terms of volume, sterility issues impacted the most units with 5.38 million. Now, this included a large eye drop recall. Contamination was second with 1.21 million units. Now, that's more than 77% of the units were connected to 2 recalls for benzene. And a third benzene recall this quarter did not report numbers, but affected a major spray deodorant brand. No NDA ANDA was third, most common reason for recalls by volume. It was linked to only 7 recalls, but impacted more than 1.15 million units across several products. There were 10 recalls for this issue in all of 2023. The volume of units recalled fell across all classes in Q1 of 2024 compared to Q4 of 2023. The biggest change was for Class 2 units. They fell from 12 million last quarter to 3.78 million this quarter. In terms of events, there were 83 Class 2 recalls in Q1. This is 1 more than last quarter. The number of events was lower for both Class 1 and Class 3 products. Class 3 recalls dropped from 23 last quarter to 8 this quarter. The 112 pharmaceutical recalls this quarter were linked to 57 unique companies. Of those, 24 companies had between 2 and 4 recalls. 3 companies had 5 or more events. And this includes 1 company with 10 recalls, all related to sterility concerns. Another company had 9 recalls for a mix of failed specification and contamination.
All right, thanks, Amanda, for that review. Before we take questions, we do want to share insights from our last partner, Beth Weinman at Ropes and Gray. So a quote from Beth's article, firms with positive assessments of quality management maturity are likely to see fewer inspections as the FDA applies its monitoring resource to higher risk firms. The opposite is also true, however. Firms that have not been assessed with high levels of quality management maturity may ultimately find themselves a higher inspection priority in a risk-based inspection surveillance environment. That means they will be more likely targets for agency enforcement action if quality practices are found to be lacking. So good insight there from Beth. Again, you can read more within our published article when you get that here shortly. With that now, we will open it up to questions that are specific to the pharmaceutical industry. I did see one come in about a trend between the medical device and pharma around sterility recalls. We definitely see that. I'm curious to understand what drives that. For me, sterility always seems like something that could be prevented based on having more robust procedures and checks and balances in place. But it is something that we definitely see across the board pop up, creating recalls. So we'll try with that question. We'll try to see if we can't mine some of the data just to see if there's anything that we can pull to see that might be driving some of the sterility concerns, if there's common factors within med device and pharma on that one. Let's see. Do you expect the FDA to pull the acne products off of the market if they contain benzoyl peroxide? Given the documented risk of benzene and the fact that an independent lab has documented tests showing the results or the risks, it seems like a prudent move. Amanda, you want to take that one?
Yep, I can take that one, Chris. There has been a lot of talk about this, and the FDA has said it wants to first confirm and reproduce the independent lab's data. Now, the same lab has had its research questioned in the past. The United States Pharmacopoeia has also raised concerns about the testing methods and procedures used by this laboratory. There are hundreds of BPO products over the counter market and 31 active new drug applications and abbreviated new drug applications for prescription benzoyl peroxide products that are listed in the FDA's Orange Book. So I think any market action for these would have a very widespread impact.
Thanks, Amanda. I do see a question. What is quality management maturity? Is it the same as high levels of compliance? I interpret it to be pretty much the same. They incorporated quality practices into their procedures. They've got robust business processes as well to achieve quality objectives. So high levels of compliance. All right, I don't see any additional specific to the pharmaceutical business. We will circle back for some of these other questions, but just to round things out, one thing that is true with every recall index, we see things are always changing. It's impossible to tie the increase in recalls or the decrease in units impacted to one or two clear reasons, but we do try to give some insights through this via the recall index. You can read the full Q1 2024 report, which will include more from our partners, those articles I mentioned in the published document. We also provide additional information on trends that we've discussed and previewed here today, along with we do preview some of the April recall numbers as well. The full report has some topics we couldn't fit into this webinar, so there's some good stuff in there. It's really information that's exclusive to Sedgwick.
We hope you can take what you have learned from our presentation and apply it to your business. And as a follow-up to today's presentation, we'll email you the full digital version of the U.S. Recall Index. We'll use that email address that you used to register for the webinar. So please check your inbox. And if for some reason you don't receive it tomorrow, let us know and we'll make sure we get a copy out to you.
Yeah, and just a reminder again, I know we've had it in the chat a few times also. The webinar for the European edition of the Recall Index is tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. So if you want to know what's on the minds of regulators in the EU and UK, please join our colleagues and get more information about the data and trends there. If you need help registering for that session, just send us an email or make a note in the chat and we'll get you more details.
Thank you, Matt. So we did mention, Matt mentioned that we are putting on a a recall roundtable. So we do have an upcoming one in August. So if you're in the consumer product industry and are interested with this, or if you're in pharma or medical device, just send me a note. My email is on the screen right now if you're interested with more details related to it. As Matt mentioned, we did just do one in New Jersey with medical device companies and some of our partners, and it was very well received. What we find is there's not a lot of other trade show or association that specifically talk about recalls, especially in pharma and med device industries. So we want to facilitate some of those discussions within those industries. So again, send me a note if you're interested. So I do think we've got time for a few more questions. We've got a few minutes. If you do prefer to talk to Amanda, Matt, or myself directly, then you can go ahead and just shoot any of us an email. We'd be happy to schedule some time to talk with you. And then, as always, if you have questions or comments regarding the format of these sessions, we'd like to hear that as well. We're always trying to improve these webinars, and if there's more information you want to see, different information, definitely send that over to us as well, so we can look for some of those improvements. With that, I do think we've got a little bit of time, a few minutes for a couple questions. So I'm just going to scan again the chat and QA module to see what we may have missed earlier on that we can circle back on. There was a question related to CPSC and ICFSO. I think very little on that, but I think the primary limitation right now appears to be more budgetary uncertainty when it comes to that. Let's see. There is a comment about splitting undeclared allergens from mere labeling errors, which we do see a number of recalls based on the labeling errors, and then cross-contamination or cross-contact as well, which could cause an issue. We'll check and see if we get visibility with that. That is a good call out when it comes to allergens, which, as we know, is a top category for recalls. So good call out there. We'll see what data we might be able to look at for it. Do you have insights on the success of recalls for consumer goods? Is there any evidence of the public getting recall fatigue and not participating is successful related to the original price of the product? So really good question. We do know there is a bit of recall fatigue out there, and it's how do you engage with consumers? And I think companies have to look at human behavior and what they need to do to actually, make consumers aware of a recall, which is one thing, but how do you get them to take it serious, understanding the hazard and participate? We do know, though, the less expensive a product is, the less likely they may respond to the recall, but they may stop using it. So I think, the main intent is to remove the hazard. So a lot of times they may just discontinue it or throw it away. We definitely want to make sure they're not selling it on secondary markets, on online marketplaces or garage sales, et cetera. So I think it's a balance today of what data is available. We know direct notification to consumers is more beneficial. So what can we do as an industry to try and incentivize people to register their products? I'm in this industry, been in it 20 years, and I very rarely register for warranties or other issues that may pop up. So how can we get better at making it easier to get that data in the event a recall may occur? Will help with direct notification, but then how can we incentivize consumers to further take action, participate in the recall as well? I do still see, depending on the value of the product, how the product's used, what the hazard is, how long ago it was distributed, all factors that may impact response levels. So you do still see some smaller levels at times. But you also see 90% in other recalls as well.
I will also just add that. Sorry, I was just going to say I will also add one factor that a lot of companies don't think about is media coverage as well. So depending on what's in the news, if you're closing in on political races or whatnot, then that recall is not going to be in the news or hitting the media as much. So that also always plays a factor as well.
Yep, good call out. There's a question on healthcare technologies. How will the regulatory framework keep up with the sectors and rapid evolution? How do we expect to see, do we expect to see reactive as opposed to proactive regulatory I think the agencies try to get in front of things, but especially in the medical device industry, it does appear at times they're trying to play catch up with the regulations. I especially look at connected devices, so apps on phones with medical devices, where you could have vulnerabilities for hacking in other areas as well. So I think the more technology that's used, there isn't necessarily just the risk of it being misused or there being a hazard specifically with it. I think now with connected devices and technologies, you have the risk of bad players and vulnerabilities associated with hacking into devices that are connected as well. We are seeing a shift from bad players and hackers, hacking the financial market to the healthcare market quite a bit. So I think that's something they're going to have to stay in front of. We'll see a lot more recalls related to that, but unfortunately, I think it is a bit more reactionary than proactive right now. All right, I think we may have had a couple other questions come in, but feel free to send those directly to us, or we'll try to address those offline. I know we are out of time now, so I do want to thank Amanda and Matt for joining me on the webinar, and then Matt Gig and Luke Shires behind the scenes. They make this webinar possible, so thank you very much for all your help in that. And lastly, thank you for the audience for your participation with it. We will be sending out the actual published edition shortly, but thank you for your time and joining us today. Have a good rest of the day, everyone.